This is part 2 of my Rise of the Sentinels rewrite. Please watch part 1 if you haven't already. Next up on the list is Piltover and Zon, or Zontover as I sometimes like to call it. In this case, I think we can all safely call it the single worst chapter in the visual novel. Seriously, what happened here? Why was Graves, of all people, chosen to be the Sentinel from this region? Did we really need to waste an entire chapter chasing after him? Maybe the one good thing about this region was the introduction of Des and Ada, and even they get kind of shafted by this end of the story. Okay, so let's address these two first and foremost. Des and Ada were a cool idea. I like that we can go to a region where the Sentinels of Light are still somewhat active, even if it's just the two of them. I like their designs, their personalities, and their weapons. It's just a shame we didn't get to spend more time with them. What are their backstories? How long have they been Sentinels? Even the nature of their relationship is kind of vague, though it's heavily implied to be romantic. With that last point in mind, let's take a good long look at these two. A peacekeeping duo from Piltover and Zon, one with pink hair and the other with blue, heavily implied to be in a relationship. Guys, come on, they're Vi and Caitlyn. They're literally Vi and Caitlyn 2.0. Like, don't get me wrong, I like Ada and Des. They do have relatively distinct personalities from the Enforcer duo, but I can't be the only one who sees it, right? Given how little they ultimately wind up mattering in the story, I feel like they could comfortably be taken out of this rewrite to make room for some actual champions. On that note, I firmly maintain the stance that Jace should have been the Sentinel rep for Piltover. Or one of them, at least. Now, Arcane has definitely given his character a lot more nuance, but Jace's backstory on Universe literally makes him a perfect fit for the Sentinels. Jace is opposed to Victor's glorious evolution because he values free will, something the Black Mist strips away from those it corrupts. The man is literally called the Defender of Tomorrow, effectively acting as the city's very own superhero. How could he not get involved when the Black Mist is taking over? Also, if we're going to include Jace, then I think it only makes sense to include his best friend and greatest enemy. Victor is prime for ruination. The man is obsessed with advancing human evolution through artificial means, even if it means stripping away someone's humanity in the process. Now, to his credit, most of those who take part in the glorious evolution do so voluntarily. For now. There's a reason why the Battlecast skin line exists. That's an alternate universe, however. In League's main continuity, it would be comically easy to incorporate Ruin Victor, especially after Arcane. The Black Mist has the power to transform organic beings into undying spirits, as well as alter or flat out remove emotions. It very much is a more twisted version of the kind of evolution Victor wants, and with Viego's magic influencing his mind, I can easily see him embracing ruination. Plus, the potential to blend ghastly and cyborg elements lends itself to some really cool design opportunities. Hell, he already has a skin based around the idea, albeit not explicitly ruined. Alright, while we're still on the topic of duos, let's address Caitlyn and Vi. These two are probably the most iconic champions in all of Piltover, and there's a lot to discuss with them now that Arcane is out. I've gone back and forth on this a bit in my head, but I ultimately believe this should be another recruitment choice, where either Caitlyn or Vi gets ruined depending on some decision you make in the story. In fact, let's play with that scenario a bit, shall we? Let's say that during the harrowing, after meeting up with Caitlyn and Vi, Urgot and Jinx both start going on independent rampages. Not wanting to deal with them and the Black Mist, the duo splits up to pursue both criminals, Vi going after Urgot and Caitlyn after Jinx. The one you go with is the one you end up recruiting, while the other gets ruined. Ruined Vi would be such a fun character to explore. Now, I won't spoil anything for Arcane in case you guys haven't seen it yet, but Vi has a lot of baggage to work with. Currently, she's working with Caitlyn as an enforcer to try and help bridge the gap between Piltover and Zon. As we see in the Child of Zon story, she's ultimately embraced her role as a protector of both cities, despite how much Piltover has hurt her in the past. She defies Urgot's movement because she believes violent revolution isn't the path to peace, a lesson ingrained into Vi by her mentor. But what if the Black Mist got to her? What if all those old wounds from her past opened up again, reminding Vi over and over just how much these arrogant Pilties have taken from her? Her friends, her family. Hell, maybe even a few certain characters could show up as raids to taunt her. Ultimately, Vi snaps and perhaps even embraces that Urgot mentality, that the only way to fix Piltover is to tear it all down. If you go with Vi, you can maybe talk her down and keep her from succumbing to the Black Mist. Otherwise, Urgot manages to get in her head, allowing the Black Mist to transform her. But, of course, talking her down leads to you recruiting Sentinel Vi. Either way, I think we can all agree that the design overhaul of her gauntlets would be rad. On the flip side of things, we have Ruined Caitlyn or Sentinel Caitlyn, depending on your choice. Now, initially I thought that Ruined Caitlyn wouldn't really work, but after listening to some of her new voice lines in the game, I think there's something there. Caitlyn is probably best described as lawful good. She wants to uphold peace in her city by rooting out crime and corruption, even if it means going against some powerful political players in the process. Her relationship with Jinx is especially interesting. While Vi ultimately wants to protect her sister, Caitlyn is quoted as saying that she's too far gone. After the ending of Arcane, you can see why. Caitlyn has been trying to catch and arrest Jinx for years, but to no avail. Jinx always manages to elude her, causing more chaos and destruction, sometimes even killing people in the process. Hunting her alone through the Black Mist, I can imagine Caitlyn becoming more ruthless, more aggressive and trying to bring down Jinx once and for all. Of course, you talk her down from doing anything too drastic if you go with her, and stop her with Vi if you don't. In either case, Ruined Caitlyn would effectively become lawful evil, adopting the mentality that there are some criminals that should simply be put down rather than locked up. Jinx, Karina, the Kim Barons. If Viego could help her rid these blights from her city, why not embrace his powers? Otherwise, you get Sentinel Caitlyn trying to capture and contain Ruined Vi. A Relic Stone sniper rifle would fit her perfectly, don't you think? Now, there is another character who I think should become an ally in this chapter, but not necessarily a Sentinel. I know her very existence is kind of controversial, and with good reason, but just hear me out. How would Seraphine react to all of this? Piltover and Zon are overrun by tortured souls, and as an empath, I can't imagine being surrounded by all that anguish and despair would sit well with Seraphine. Perhaps she could try and soothe the souls of the undead with her singing, or bring peace of mind to the living during this waking nightmare. However, her efforts are soon foiled by another singer. The Death Singer, to be precise. Yes, we're bringing in Karthus during this chapter. Now, you could justify his inclusion in any region, and you might even argue that he'd be a better fit for Noxus since, that's where he's from. Frankly, I'm putting him in Piltover and Zon mainly because of the thematic parallel. The Death Singer versus the starry-eyed songstress. Haunting opera versus cheery K-pop. In the end, Karthus emerges triumphant, drowning out Seraphine's voice and forcing her to take refuge with everyone else. At this point, Seraphine would probably bow out of the story, but it would be an interesting way to set her up for future story arcs. I know the general consensus is to just pretend she doesn't exist, since Seraphine exists mainly to market an alternate skin line anyways, but I do think there's interesting stuff you could do with her, especially after subjecting her to a harrowing. Also, it might give Gwen's in-game taunt some deeper meaning beyond just being a meta jab at the character. So far, we've discussed a lot of Piltover characters, so let's move down a bit and talk about the Zonites. What better place to start than Janna, Zon's guardian wind spirit? Janna's entire thing is that she helps provide the people of Zon with clean air, something they desperately need with all the toxic fumes being dumped on them all the time. That said, Jana's power is directly tied to the prayers and beliefs of the people. So unless several people are all praying to her at once, it's difficult for Jana to even maintain a physical form. Now, regardless of your personal beliefs, I think we can all agree that an undead apocalypse is probably a good time for people to start praying. So, where is Jana? What, you're going to tell me that all of her followers in Zon aren't going to be clutching their bird pendants and asking for help when the black mist is running amok? Okay, fine. Maybe we can say that doesn't happen at first. But imagine if Jana actually plays a huge role in the finale of the region. We could have Rookie urging the other Sentinels to start praying for Jana's help. And while I imagine much of the party might be reluctant to do so at first, ultimately your combined wishes summon the Wind Spirit and give her the power to summon a massive gale that blows away the black mist. Obviously, she can't stop the harrowing, and it would be only for a moment of refuge, but it would give the Sentinels an opportunity to escape with the fetter and give the people of both cities some much needed breathing room. Unfortunately, I think that about does it for the Zontovercast. Yes, I know we barely touched on most of the Zon characters, but, well, it doesn't exactly help that most champions from that region are already evil aligned anyways. Mundo, Urgot, Singed, Warwick, Jinx. I don't think there's anything particularly interesting you could do with them as Ruin characters, and I certainly don't think they'd be particularly great fits for Sentinels. Maybe Echo could work, but how you'd combine Relic Stone with all his time tech, I have no idea. For now, I think we have a decent cast of characters for this chapter, so let's move on to the next region. Right off the bat, Ishtal raises several issues. The kingdom has effectively been isolated from the world for centuries, to the point that most don't even know that a nation exists within the Kamungu jungles. Hell, it straight up stated that the ruination of the Blessed Isles was one of the deciding factors for why Ishtal decided to shut itself off, along with the Void, the Darken War, and the Rune Wars. So, how and when did the Sentinels get into contact with the people of Ishtal to make a base there? How is there an Ishtali Sentinel in Legends of Runeterra when the kingdom is only just now starting to come out of isolation? Yeah, I know there are some smaller indigenous tribes and villages scattered here and there, mostly Vistayan, but it's still weird to have a sentinel base there, especially when Noxians have been trying to make a base in the jungle for years and it always fails. In this chapter, I think it would make more sense for the Sentinels to have actually sailed there, arriving in one of the coastal settlements like Mudtown or Halaport. Maybe the latter since it's closest to Ishtal's capital. From there, they have to work their way deeper and deeper into the jungle, fending off undead beasts all the while. On that note, let's address the only character from the region to actually be involved in the event, Rengar. Honestly, I think Sentinel Rengar was a great choice, even if they butchered his character in the execution. They made him too dumb and used way too many cat jokes, when Rengar is supposed to be a proud, cunning, and ruthless hunter. Also, he does not refer to himself in the third person. That's the very reason why I think it makes sense for him to join the Sentinels. It's hard to actually hunt anything when all your prey is being raised from the dead, and even harder when you're being hunted by the ghosts of said prey without a means to kill them. Rengar joining the Sentinels to drive out the Black Mist and reclaim his place at the top of the food chain makes perfect sense in my opinion. That said, I think Ruined Rengar would be an equally valid choice to go with. It's not hard to imagine how his obsession with a good hunt might be turned into something far more sinister, especially if he comes to view the Sentinels as worthy prey. Personally, I prefer Rengar as a Sentinel, if only because it would be cool to have him face the ghost of Avenged Ponjaf. More on that later. Another character I think would make for a good Sentinel is Nidalee, or Nidalee. I mean, her story revolves around how she was raised by a cougar, only for the Kilash, Rengar's people, to kill Nidalee's adopted mother. Needless to say, this would open the doors for some very interesting dialogue between her and Rengar, who left his people behind when he felt the tribe had lost its honor under Ponjaf's leadership. I also just think Sentinel Nidalee would be a cool design, especially with a relic stone spear. I'm not sure how you could tie it into her cougar form, but maybe we'll just say she can channel the relic light into her fangs and claws. I mean, her normal spear disappears and reappears when Nidalee shapeshifts, so it's still presumably on her person, right? Alright, we've talked about the Kilosh a fair bit now, but a small recap for those unfamiliar. The Kilosh are a race of tiger Vastaya that live in the Kamungu jungle. And yes, they are Rengar's people. The Kilosh are fierce warriors and hunters, although for many years they were under the rule of Rengar's father, Ponjaf. Ponjaf was, to put it bluntly, not a great father. He basically left Rengar to starve for being the runt of the litter, and when Rengar finally returned years later, Ponjaf dismissed him again, claiming that Rengar could only return if he hunted and killed the beast known as Kha'Zix, and brought back a trophy as proof of his claim. Rengar returned in failure, but as Ponjaf scolded him, Rengar realized that his father's own trophies were dusty and old. The Kilosh chief himself was past his prime, and hasn't actually hunted anything himself in years. Enraged, Rengar killed his own father and left the tribe, even though they were willing to crown him the new chief. In short, neither Rengar nor Nidalee care much for these Vastaya, which is why I think they'd make for great adversaries in the Kamungu chapter, particularly if they were undead. On that note, let's now discuss the main antagonist of the region, Thresh. I do think that this is a good chapter to have the Sentinels confront him, because Ishtal as a whole only has like 6 champions affiliated to it, not counting Kha'Zix, and I don't really think many of them are great fit for this story anyways. Besides, what they tried to do with Thresh here was interesting, even if it wound up becoming one of the dumbest decisions in the story. Now, we'll talk more in depth about Thresh's role in the greater narrative later, but for the time being, let's stay focused on what he does in Ishtal. Thresh is the one who tells the Sentinels about the Absolver, and believe me, we will get to that thing in Shurima. He makes a whole demon deal with Lucian about it, which is incredibly stupid because Lucian should be the last person on Runeterra willing to bargain with Thresh. But the setup is fantastic. Thresh knows the Sentinels are losing this fight, that every encounter with Viego has effectively been a loss. They're growing in numbers, but Viego is growing in power, and you're woefully behind when it comes to collecting the feathers. Him offering a way to turn the tides in their favor would definitely be enticing, especially to someone like Rookie, who's less familiar with Thresh's twisted games. What I want is for Thresh to get some alone time with Rookie and make them a deal. In a proper visual novel, the player should of course be given a choice to accept or refuse the offer. But either way, this is Thresh we're talking about. Him honoring his deal only to immediately try and take your soul, thus making it meaningless, is 100% in character for him, and I am disappointed in Riot for not taking the opportunity. Like, oh yes, I said I'd tell you how to turn the tides, but I never said I'd let you walk away and give that information to your allies. On the flip side, refusing him could maybe lead to a bad ending of sorts. I don't know. Up to your imagination. Okay, now that we've gotten Thresh out of the way, let's briefly discuss the other characters. Like I said, I don't think there's much you could really do with most of the Ishtali cast. I don't think Nico really works as a Sentinel or a Ruined rep, especially if we've already done the cute character turns evil thing with Lilia. Kiana honestly seems way too prideful to join the Sentinels or submit to Viego. And honestly, given her whole multi-element gimmick, I don't think a pure light or darkness motif would really fit her. And Malphite, I mean, he's not even in Ishtal anymore according to Legends of Runeterra, but he's a freaking kaiju, so probably best to just keep him out. I could maybe see Ruin Zyra using the black mist to spread her undead seeds, but that's really not any different from normal Zyra. So yeah, I think that about does it for Ishtal. We really need some more champs from that region. Next on the list is Shurima, which should have arguably been the most eventful chapter in the story. The majority of the chapter would likely be spent searching for the Absolver, the supposed trump card need to turn the tides against Viego. Right off the bat, let's address the elephant in the room. I don't like Akshan. He feels incredibly redundant and completely unnecessary to the story. Like, his whole thing about trying to bring back his dead mentor is supposed to serve as a parallel for Viego's obsession with bringing back a soul, but we already have that parallel with Lucian, the guy who spent literal years hunting down Thresh to avenge/free Senna's soul. Also, can we talk about the Absolver? What is this weapon? Like, seriously, what is it? It's a relic that can bring the dead back to life, but only if you kill their killer. So it only works for bringing back murder victims. That's some Full Metal Alchemist equivalent exchange going on there, but nowhere near as well fleshed out. How the actual hell did the Sentinels learn to make a weapon that can do this? What allows it to do this in the first place? There's also several questions regarding the specifics of the Absolver, like how recent the death has to be, what actually counts as murder, and oh yeah, how did Akshan manage to engineer a grappling hook onto this thing? The most backstory we get for the Absolver is that it might have come from Ishtal, and the most use it gets in the story is bringing back Lucian, Rookie, Gwen, and Senna after they all die in some really unremarkable ways. Hell, the last two are brought back purely through technicality. They need Isolde's soul fragments in them to survive, but then Viego takes those and reassembles Isolde. Akshan then shoots Isolde's ghost, and that apparently works to revive Gwen and Senna because she technically killed them by leaving their bodies? Again, how does this thing work? Like, seriously, the fact that it works on technicalities raises so many ridiculous possibilities. Like, if you die by a disease, does shooting the germs with the Absolver bring you back to life? Right? What if someone kills another person in an accident? Does that count? There's so many specifics about the Absolver that lead to so many unintentionally hilarious scenarios. And I both love and hate it at the same time. Alright, let's take it down a notch. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've concluded that both Akshan and the Absolver need to be reworked from the ground up. Now, it should be noted that Akshan was clearly designed around his gameplay gimmick, bringing dead allies back to life by killing the enemy champion that took them down. Akshan mains might find my suggestions a little controversial, but just hear me out. Instead of the whole hyper-specific killing killers to save their victims gimmick, I believe the Absolver should just be an equivalent exchange of souls. Imagine, you kill someone with the Absolver, and it absorbs their life energy, storing it inside. You then fire that life energy at a corpse, or maybe even a spirit, and it brings them back to life. In terms of gameplay, this would make it so that you just need to kill an enemy champion, store their soul, and then run up to a dead ally to revive them. Of course, you can only hold one soul at a time to make things a little more balanced. As if League actually cares about balance. As for why and how such a weapon exists, well, given that the Absolver is in Shurima, I think it makes sense for Nasus to play some part in its creation. You know, the Ascended who literally studied the cycle of life and death and has all kinds of knowledge about souls. My general thinking is that perhaps the Sentinels encountered Nasus some couple hundred years ago after setting up shop in Shurima. And he teaches them a bit about soul magic to help them in their quest. Seems like a thing he'd do. I know he was in self-imposed isolation until recently, but Nasus was still willing to help Rise look for the world runes at some point. I think a story about him helping craft a relic weapon for the Sentinels could be really interesting. And maybe the random grappling hook made out of some unidentified green stone could in fact be the receptacle through which it takes and delivers souls. There's a lot we could do with the Absolver, but now let's move on to its wielder. As stated before, Akshan feels like an incredibly redundant addition to the story. The idea of a rogue sentinel who's off pursuing his own goals during the harrowing is interesting, but randomly hunting down warlords to find the one who killed his mentor was not the best way to go with it. I mean, in theory, isn't it more likely that the warlords sent their henchmen to kill Shadia? Wouldn't it then make more sense to go through the warlord's soldiers, or is this another technicality thing for the Absolver? There are a lot of holes in Akshan's logic, but let's focus more on how to fill them in. I could do a whole Runeterra rewrite episode about this guy, but for now, here's a basic summary of what I have in mind. You can keep most of the story the same, but perhaps rather than being outright killed, Shadia is simply attacked with some kind of cursed weapon and forced into a death-like sleep, kind of like Princess Aurora. Since she's not technically dead, Akshan can't use the Absolver to save her, meaning that he has to track down the scoundrel responsible for putting the curse on her. This would also give some more weight to Akshan's decision. In the story, they make a big deal about him giving up his quest to save Shadia to go and help the Sentinels, knowing that his master wouldn't want him to sacrifice the world for her. In other words, he agrees to honor her wish, whereas Viego clearly doesn't know or care about what his soul wants. The thing is, the whole affair comes off as kind of superfluous. I mean, Akshan literally says that he's going to go back to hunting warlords once Viego is dealt with, so it's not like he gave up on his quest. If anything, he took a detour from it. Kind of undermines the gravity of the situation, don't you think? I believe what should have happened is that when you encounter him in Shurima, Akshan is right on the cusp of finding the scoundrel who cursed Shadia, but he knows that if he takes too long pursuing them, they're likely to get away and the trail will go cold. That's it. That's all you need to do to give his decision more weight. Well, we've spent a lot of time talking about Akshan and the Absolver, so let's move on, shall we? Shurima as a whole would be a very interesting region. After all, it's currently caught up in a war between demigods, all of whom should be more than capable of opposing the Black Mist in their own right. That being said, I don't think that any of them would make for fantastic Sentinel recruits in the long run, nor do I think any of them should get ruined. Don't get me wrong, though. I do want the Ascended to appear in the story. In fact, I think they should play a major role in the hunt for the Absolver. Let's start with Nasus. As stated before, his whole thing is having in-depth knowledge about the cycle of life and death. I mean, he can literally absorb souls to make himself stronger. I feel like he'd fare pretty well against the Black Mist that came knocking at his door. You might be able to argue that the trauma of his past and the loss of his brother would make Nasus a prime target for ruination, but I also feel like he probably has the mental fortitude to resist Viego's influence. I think what would work much better is if the Sentinels managed to find Nasus' library, and after a brief scuffle with the Bakai guarding it, encountered the curator himself. They ask Nasus about the Absolver, and after some persuasion, he agrees to tell them more about it. The meeting is cut short, however, when the Black Mist attacks Nasus' library and he's forced to confront the undead, granting the Sentinels a chance to escape. The party heads off in search for the Absolver's last known hiding place, but because they came into contact with Nasus, his scent lingers on them, which attracts the attention of the curator's brother. So, Renekton is insane. His mind was broken long ago by Zareth, and he's now consumed with a desire for revenge. Of any Ascended, he might be the most susceptible to ruination. But even if he was turned by the Black Mist, I don't think anything would change. He'd still just be consumed with a desire for revenge. Honestly, I kind of like the idea of Renekton just being so angry that his rage and bloodlust drown out Viego's influence. Even so, I like the idea of him becoming an obstacle for the group. The Sentinels have to flee the Butcher of the Sands because they came into contact with Nasus, forcing them to seek refuge. Ultimately, that brings them to the capital itself, where they manage to flee from both the Butcher and the undead. While in the capital, the Sentinels would have the chance to encounter Azir. Needless to say, the Emperor of the Sands isn't the sort to bow to any other ruler, intending to one day unite all of Runeterra under his banner. I think Azir would probably also be the most suited to dealing with a harrowing, since he can summon an endless number of soldiers, turrets, and various beasts from the sand as a counter to the endless tide of undead. I can imagine his city becoming a bastion for the people of Shurima to hide from the Black Mist. one of the few places on Runeterra Viego still can't easily get to, especially with the sun disk hovering overhead. I think interactions with Azir could be interesting. Perhaps he originally dismisses the Sentinels, deeming them as unnecessary because his light is the only one the people of Shurima truly need. He offers the Sentinels refuge, but has no real intention of spending the time to help them find the Absolver, mainly because he's so focused on constantly summoning his sand soldiers. Soon enough, though, the Emperor is greeted with a familiar face. I'll be honest here, I actually love the idea of an undead Xerath skin. There's some really cool fan art of the concept floating around out there. That said, I absolutely do not think Xerath could canonically be ruined either. Similar to Azir, it just seems out of character for the Magus Ascendant to submit to any power other than his own. That said, I think he could absolutely use the Black Mist to his advantage. Xerath, as well as his various energy monsters, could be completely unaffected by the harrowing. They see the undead as little more than an annoyance, but once he realizes that so many of them are converging on Azir's capital, Xerath could take that as his opportunity to launch an offensive on Azir's city. When he arrives, the Emperor of the Sands now has two opposing armies to deal with, and the situation quickly spirals out of control. Ultimately, the Sentinels are forced to flee the capital along with several citizens, as the Ascended duke it out. Wouldn't be the first time these demigods have fought without giving us a conclusive ending, right? Sometime after fleeing the capital, the party encounters the penultimate Shuriman champion of this chapter, Sivir. Now, a part of me kind of wants Sivir to join the Sentinels, but the main issue is whether you could justify her swapping out her weapon with a relic stone one. The Chalakar is already a powerful magical artifact that can channel celestial energy, though in all fairness, Sivir hasn't quite learned how to use that power yet. Regardless of whether or not she joins permanently, though, I think it would be interesting for the Sentinels to employ her services in tracking down the Absolver. In other words, she's the one who finally leads the party to Akshan. As mentioned before, Akshan's primary conflict revolves around risking his own mission of reviving Shadia to help the Sentinels with their own. Honestly, the whole situation of him initially blowing the group off only to change his mind and save the day at the last moment is fine. What I don't like is that Rookie and Lucian try to stupidly fight Viego by themselves and then get killed by some chump wraiths. Frankly, it makes much more sense, in my opinion, to have Shurima serve as perhaps the final major encounter with Vex. Ultimately, Vex's presence in the story was so unnecessary. She constantly serves as nothing more than an annoyance to the Sentinels and doesn't really even add that much. While I haven't touched on her much in the earlier chapters, I do think the best way to handle her is having her constantly show up throughout each region, using her powers to hinder the Sentinels. Again, her shadow supposedly has the power to make people feel sorrowful and depressed, which could be a key factor in what corrupts many of the ruined champions you encounter. Eventually, though, Vex should have a breaking point. She's lazy, unenergetic, and hates fighting. But after seeing the Sentinels overcome her obstacles time and again, I think it's only right that Vex should let loose by this point. Do I think she'd be strong enough to handle all the Sentinels you've recruited thus far? Not exactly. Not unless she was getting help from some powerful undead in the process. I mean, we never really see her use much, if any, of her in-game kit during the event. So what better way to tease the then new champion by giving players a taste of what she can do in the visual novel? Ultimately, the Sentinels would defeat Vex, but she manages to escape. I think this is the point where she should really start questioning her loyalty to Viego. Not because she just doesn't like his motivation, but because she's having to put in so much effort on his behalf. Regardless, I'd like Shurima to ultimately be another victory for the Sentinels. Not just because they recruit Akshan and maybe Sivir, but because they acquire another fetter as well after defeating Vex. As for the other Shurima characters, the only ones who I think might be interesting to see here would be Rammus and Amumu. I don't think either of them would have particularly large roles, but it could be fun to just see Rammus barrel through a bunch of raids, then roll away without a word. As for Amumu, well, Amumu is another case of a character who's technically undead, but he's weird. It doesn't seem like Amumu was resurrected through hemomancy or necromancy, and there's a lot about his past that's still up in the air. Could the Black Mist affect him? If so, how? Perhaps it causes his curse powers to run rampant? Food for thought. Now we move on to the penultimate region, Targon. Yes, I do believe that Targon would be a much better fit for the penultimate region in this event. It is literally the domain of the gods in Runeterra, home of celestial magic. The power of the cosmos is literally the only thing that can drive back the void. So there's absolutely no way that the undead should be able to assail the mountain so easily. Unless, perhaps, Viego's power is being bolstered by all the fetters he's collected so far. Of course, even with that power boost, I don't buy for a moment that the Black Mist could overtake Targon's peak. The rest of the mountain, though, that's a different story. Let's start things off by talking about Diana, the canon sentinel of this region. To be completely honest, I have mixed feelings about this one. For one thing, the fact that she apparently hasn't met or interacted with any other Lunari in this event, when Legends of Runeterra clearly establishes otherwise, is just nonsensical. Also, the fact that she needs a relic weapon when she can harness the power of moonlight is just redundant. The only way I think that works is if you have some reason why she couldn't use her celestial magic against the Black Mist. Like, say, having her connection to the heavens diminish somehow. Beyond that, though, I do think Diana makes for a great sentinel. It's a rad design, and she takes her whole role of being a light in the darkness pretty seriously. I think it's also plenty likely that she'd take up arms against the Black Mist if it became a threat to her people, especially once Pantheon shows back up. So I'll be real. I initially hated the idea of Ruined Pantheon, like many others. I mean, this guy's entire deal is that he runs on pure willpower. He was literally too stubborn to die from Aatrox's sword, when that blow killed the god residing inside of him. I'd go so far as to say Atreus, the actual name of Pantheon's host, might be the biggest badass in League of Legends. However, when I saw that it is in fact Ruined Pantheon, my mind immediately changed. Here's some context for the uninitiated. Pantheon is basically League's war god, and he, like most Targonian deities, likes to choose mortal vessels to dwell inside of whenever he has to interact with the physical realm. The guy that we see in-game is Atreus, Pantheon's last vessel before a certain Darkin freaking killed the god of war. Now, Atreus is basically running around with the remnants of Pantheon's power, picking fights with every other deity because he's sick and tired of them messing up the lives of mortals. With that in mind, I think the way they went about justifying Ruined Pantheon is kind of brilliant. In a sense, the god is effectively a dark mirror of Atreus, a ruthless warmonger who mercilessly crushes anyone in his way as opposed to the honorable soldier who fights only to protect what's important to him. Plus, the Black Mist is literally all about raising the souls of the dead. Why couldn't it affect the soul of a deceased god? Really, the biggest failure here is that we don't see Atreus and Pantheon struggling for control at any point. A massive wasted opportunity. Also, let's talk about the fact that Viego beat Atreus in a duel. Yeah, I don't buy that for a second. This is the guy who has gone up against both Aatrox and Xerath and lived to tell the tale. I think Pantheon returning should just be a natural result of Atreus being exposed to the Black Mist for long enough, not a contrived defeat at the hands of a guy with nowhere near as much actual combat experience. I know power scaling and versus debates are a contentious topic at the best of times, but Viego's plot armor in this event is way overdone. He's a king who relied mostly on soldiers to do fighting for him, going up against an actual soldier. On that note, I also don't really think it makes sense for Viego to be capable of influencing the other aspects. Ruined Pantheon works because the war god is already dead, but I really doubt that the Black Mist could affect a living celestial. I've seen the idea of ruined Leona throw around, and while I do find the idea interesting, I'm just not so sure that the Black Mist would jive all that well with the sun goddess living inside her. Besides, I think one deity under Viego's control would already be more than enough for the Sentinels to have to deal with. Rather than focus on getting too many characters from Targon involved, I think the penultimate chapter should be where things really start coming to a head. Ruined Pantheon would be a massive obstacle for the entire party, and I can easily see him being the point in which things take a turn for the worst. As the party is weakened from their fight with the war god, Viego and Vex appear to capture Senna in the chaos. Fortunately, the Sentinels would be given a chance to retreat back to base once Atreus takes back control of his body for a time, perhaps thanks to Rookie calling out to the warrior's spirit. The Sentinels retreat back to headquarters, only to find that the whole building has been ransacked in their absence. All the fetters they've successfully gathered over the adventure have been stolen, meaning that Viego now has all of his old soul fragments save for the one inside Gwen. Things seem dire, but I imagine this is the point where Rookie, perhaps with a little help from Akshan, rouses the party's spirits for one last assault. Diana, injured from her battle with Pantheon, finds herself unable to harness the full power of the moon, and thus Gwen fashions her a new set of sentinel attire and a relic stone blade to better combat the undead. With your final party member recruited, everyone prepares to set out for the Shadow Isles and face the ruined king once and for all. This is it. This is the big climactic battle against the ruined king. An all or nothing assault to bring down the Lord of the Shadow Isles. Needless to say, a good chunk of this chapter will likely be spent fighting off the undead, but there's still room for respite every now and then, as well as opportunities to make a few more allies. In the original visual novel, this is the point where the party encounters the Watcher on the Isles. This old sentinel has, somehow, remained a lone vigil on the Shadow Isles for years, even taming a few ghost dogs to help him keep watch. Supposedly, his job is to observe the state of the mist and send out a warning to the other sentinels when it starts growing more powerful. To be honest, I would have liked it more if he's the one who contacts the party at the start, rather than the Buru Sentinel. I think it makes more sense for this old veteran to be the one who knows about the Wayfinder and tasks the younger generation with building up an army before losing contact. I think it'd also be neat if Tech and Kana were with him. Perhaps he manages to get into contact with the Ionia outpost at some point. It might seem a little contrived, but I'd prefer if the Sentinels you met earlier actually came back to help you, rather than just getting ruined like Ada and Des were. Beyond just bringing the Mistcatchers to the Isles, though, I do like the other main contribution that the grizzled Sentinel makes in introducing the party to Yorick. Let's be honest, Yorick was done dirty in the original script. The man has dedicated centuries to trying to bring down Viego. His plan basically amounts to fighting the army of the undead by raising his own army of the undead. Yorick's been slowly but surely gathering corpses on the Isles for ages, using his power to commune with spirits to keep them from falling under Viego's control, in the hopes that one day he'll be able to rival the ruined king with sheer numbers. Now, however, Viego has gotten much stronger thanks to all the fetters he's absorbed, and Yorick knows that his army alone won't be nearly enough. Perhaps, though, he may stand a chance with the Sentinels at his side, especially since Yorick's been safekeeping the Maiden of the Mist. Now, we'll get back to her a bit later, don't worry. But for the time being, I think this setup is all we need for an epic final confrontation. With the Sentinels and Yorick's Mistwalkers at your side, you storm the city of Helia, aiming to fight your way through Viego's abominations and reach the ruined king's throne room. The majority of the chapter would take place in the Blessed Isle's fallen capital, which has effectively become a battlefield. Needless to say, there's a lot that should happen here. Your confrontation with the Ruin Champions, Hecarim, Karthus, and any other major undead character who hasn't shown up yet. Lucian would have to take charge in Senna's place and command the troops as best he can, though I imagine things would very quickly devolve into chaos. Ultimately, with everything else that happens, the Sentinels are unable to keep rookies safe for long, and so the player avatar meets their end. Now, in my original rewrite, I had a ruined Buru Sentinel kill rookie, though I think there's a number of ways you could go about it. Swarmed by Rays, run down by Hecarim, blasted by Karthus, or maybe ambushed by Vex. Pick your poison. But death is not the end. No, far from it. As Rookie's life ebbs, they encounter a mysterious figure in the darkness. A woman, whose voice sounds oddly familiar, despite this being their first encounter. She tells Rookie, tells you, that the Wayfinder's true purpose is to serve as a beacon for the lost. You were chosen to wield it because the woman sensed that you have a strength possessed by none of your comrades. Your power lies not in tactics or fighting prowess, but the ability to reach out to those around you and inspire the best in them. Needless to say, this woman's true identity is a soul, or at the very least, a piece of her. Here and now, on the brink of death, she informs you that your mission isn't finished yet, and that you may use her power to bolster your own. Suddenly, the darkness begins to fade, and Rookie's eyes open. You find Akshan standing over you, and he confirms that he just used the Absolver's power to bring you back to life. As for whose soul he used, well, I think a strong enough wraith would probably suffice. After the brief encounter with Isolde, Rookie now understands what they must do. With Akshan's help, they grapple up to the roof of a nearby building to look out over the chaos, only for Shyvana to swoop down on them. Before Rookie and Akshan are consumed by dragonfire, Rookie raises the Wayfinder and lets loose a torrent of hallowed mist. With Isolde's power helping to keep Viego's influence at bay, Rookie can speak directly to Shyvana, reminding her of the vow she made to Jarvan and her friends in the Dragon Guard. With this, the Wayfinder is able to drive the black mist out of Shyvana's soul, empowering her with hallowed mist instead. Once freed, Shyvana allows Rookie to climb onto her back and takes to the sky so that Rookie may search for their allies and the other ruined champions. Now, this is a concept that might seem a little controversial and gimmicky, but hear me out. What if, in addition to the ruin skins, we had a sort of counterpart series for hallowed champions? Basically, as Rookie traverses the battlefield to free various ruined characters, they're imbued with the power of the hallowed mist to help them combat the undead. The main reason why I went for this was to give the ruined champions a way to hurt the undead after being set free. I think slowly but surely empowering them to fight on your side would be a good compromise, even if it's only a temporary form for them in the story. Of course, even with everyone we brought up so far, there's still one more character vital to the storyline we haven't addressed yet. Yorick's not the only one who's been working for centuries to fight against the Black Mist. A certain nature spirit on the Isles also has a bone with the Ruined King, and I think now would be as good a time as any to let him pick it. Yes, even with the Ruined champions slowly converted onto the hero's side, the undead still vastly outnumber the Sentinels, and Yorick's Mistwalkers, while plentiful, aren't exceptionally strong for what we've seen. Just as it seems that the party is at risk of being overwhelmed, gnarled tree roots emerge from the earth, and Maokai appears with his own literal homegrown army. Finally, after freeing all the ruined champs from Viego's control, Rookie reconvenes with the other Sentinels, only to discover that Gwen was taken at some point during the chaos. The main group prepares to storm the Ruined King's throne room, along with Yorick, while the Mistcatchers, Maokai, and the Hallowed champions stay behind to deal with the remaining undead. The party fights their way to Viego, only to find him just chilling on his throne. The air is tense, and Lucian immediately steps forward to ask where Senna is. At this point, I think it would be cool if Viego himself were to acknowledge the parallels between Lucian and himself. How he knows that the Purifier would also do anything for the woman he loves. A sort of "you're not so different from me" speech. It might sound a little cliche, but Riot themselves literally dedicated the first issue of the comic to highlighting these parallels. So I think it fits. Of course, the conversation ultimately turns to conflict, but even though I would like the Sentinels to get some good hits in, they're still no match for Viego at this point. They're fighting him at the heart of the Black Mist, his home turf, where Viego can conjure any number of raids to his site at a whim and freely move around. Ultimately, I think it makes sense for Viego to overpower the Sentinels here, especially if they're exhausted from everything they just went through in Helia. Seeing an opportunity, Viego takes the Wayfinder from Rookie and absorbs the soul fragment from within it. This empowers him enough to conjure the Black Mist armor we see in the visual novel, which I will confess is a pretty rad design. Viego gloats to the Sentinels before a shadowy portal appears in the throne room. Vex steps out to inform him that everything is ready, and with that, the Ruined King summons a few more raids to finish the Sentinels off while he makes for the portal. In desperation, Lucian chases after him, using his E to rush through the raids. At this point, Yorick has one final role to play. In the original visual novel, they have Yorick just giving the maiden to the Sentinels for no discernible reason, which is something he can apparently do. It's also his only contribution in the original story, which is a massive waste of potential. Even so, we can work with this idea, especially now that Yorick has actually done his part in summoning an army of Mistwalkers to get this far. Yorick gives away his shadowy cape to Rookie, causing the maiden's voice to fill their mind. To help Rookie resist this, Yorick sprinkles a single drop of his healing water on Rookie's head, telling them not to give in, but to keep her close. Rookie doesn't understand, but time is short. They race for the portal, snatching up the now lifeless Wayfinder and diving into the darkness. Rookie emerges into a field of flowers. The sky is slowly changing from dusk to dawn with the rising sun, and vacant ruins stand proud and tall not far away. It would be a peaceful place, if not for Lucian engaging Viego a short ways away. Lucian throws everything he has at the Ruined King, but to no avail. The darkness is just too thick for his relics to penetrate. Even his ult barely phases Viego at this point, and after being chided for his efforts, Lucian falls to his knees, defeated. Senna is right there, unconscious and bound to a pillar by spectral chains. All around her, the remaining fetters are scattered like offerings. Vex is off to the side, casually observing Viego as he gloats over his powerless enemy. It's then that Rookie calls out, telling Lucian not to give up. Everyone is surprised by your sudden appearance, but Viego dismisses the interruption and welcomes you to Camivore. Having delivered the final fetter to him, he welcomes you to witness the moment that he and his queen finally unite as one. Looking over the scene before them, that's when Rookie comes to a realization. Viego doesn't have all the fetters. There's one that's been right under his nose all this time that the Ruined King never noticed. No, he chose to ignore it. Viego has been utterly obsessed with Isolde all this time, calling her things like perfect and pure. However, everyone has a little darkness in their soul, even her, and it's time Viego confronted the truth. That the woman he sees as his flawless bride is just a person, like everyone else. Rookie throws Yorick's cape into the air, causing it to manifest the Maiden of the Mist. This is Isolde's darkness. All of her anger, grief, and regret. It's the part of her Viego unleashed when he tried to bring Isolde back on the Blessed Isles. The thing that drove his own sword through his chest all those years ago. Just seeing her causes Viego to falter, as though his mind struggles to comprehend that such a thing even exists, and dormant memories begin to surface. Oh, but it gets better. See, in the game, the Maiden attacks enemies by siphoning their life force. Her attack animation looks like she's sucking their soul straight out of their body. So, if Viego wants to be as one with his queen, the Maiden will oblige. She starts to siphon Viego's power away from him, starting with the soul fragments that he stole. They are, after all, hers. While the Maiden is busy with Viego, Rookie and Lucian make their way over to Senna to try and set her free. Senna falls to the ground as Lucian blasts her chains, only to catch her before she lands. We can have a little heartfelt moment here of Senna waking up in Lucian's arms, confused about what's going on, only for the moment to be interrupted by a very angry Vex. She uses Shadow to attack the Maiden and free Viego, but she's just a little late on the draw. The soul fragments that the Maiden had been absorbing fly into the air, before seeking out and returning to their original vessels. Naturally, this means Gwen is restored to life, ready for action once more. The Wayfinder also thrums to life again, its hallowed power returning. Most importantly, however, is the fact that Viego is now severely weakened. Of course, the Ruined King isn't going to take this lying down. He is furious with you at this point, and still not an adversary to take lightly. Now, in my original script, I had Shin coming in to save Rookie, bringing in all the other Sentinels and Hallowed champs with him. Admittedly, it was already kind of a stretch in the original that he could warp so many people at once, and with such a massively expanded roster of characters, I'm not totally sure how viable that is now. So, instead, I think the final battle could very well just take place with Lucian, Senna, and Gwen, seeing as they're technically the main trio with the closest actual ties to Viego. Meanwhile, Rookie confronts Vex, who's none too pleased that you've come to interfere with her gloomy world once again. So, admittedly, Vex's sudden change of heart in the original visual novel never jived with me. I mean, if her biggest desire is to make the world dark and gloomy, why does it really matter what Viego's motivation is? It really does just feel like a contrived reason for her to just turn around and help everyone get home by the end. I think it'd make more sense to cut between the fight and Rookie trying to talk Vex down. Maybe convince Vex that even if she wants to be dark and gloomy, that doesn't mean she has to force everyone else to be miserable. While this doesn't convince Vex right away, it does give her something to ponder. Ultimately, Viego is brought down by Gwen, Lucian, and Senna, the latter using her ult to heal her allies and break apart Viego's armor. Now, in my original script, I wanted to have Viego retreating back to the Isles here, though that doesn't necessarily work if all the Sentinels and Hallowed champs are still there. As much as I don't really care for just leaving him tied up in Camivore, I suppose we can follow the canon story here and say that Gwen binds him, once the cast realize that they're still not strong enough to actually put Viego down for good. It still feels a little contrived to me, but at least it doesn't completely invalidate Viego under these circumstances. See, in the original canon story, Viego has effectively become a non-entity. His plan failed, Isolde's ghost straight up rejected the dude to his face, and I'm fairly sure Akshan destroyed all but 3 of her soul fragments in the original story. Even if Viego got free again, what can you honestly do with him at this point? The guy doesn't even control the Isles anymore in the canon story, so for all intents and purposes, he's just done. So we're going a different route this time. With Viego defeated and bound, the Sentinels gather up the fetters, which still contain fragments of Isolde's soul. Viego swears to break free and come for them again, but even if he does, he won't be able to move the Black Mist very far beyond the Shadow Isles. Vex, now seeing how lame Viego looks in his current form, and frankly just tired of fighting, agrees to send the Sentinels back to the Isles to reconvene with their comrades, hoping never to see them again. Thus, Lucian, Senna, Rookie, and Gwen leave Camivore behind them, taking the fetters along. The portal brings them back to Helia, where it seems the fighting has stopped. All the champions you met throughout the journey at this point have gathered in the city's remains, and you report the situation, that Viego was beaten and subdued, and the fetters are in your possession. Some might question the choice to leave him alive, but Gwen assures everyone that Viego won't be a threat now. Still, there's only one way to make absolutely sure. Rookie returns the maiden's shadowy cloak to Yorick, then uses the Wayfinder to take everyone back to Sentinel HQ. The whole place is a bit cramped, but what's important is that the map table shows the Black Mist retreating back to the Shadow Isles. Lucian and Senna agree to take custody of the fetters and store them in the Sentinel vaults. It's also around this point that the Hallowed champs finally start returning to normal, since it was only ever a temporary power-up anyways. From here, most of the cast is going to head back home and resume their own stories. But I want everyone to have been affected by this event at least a little bit. Olaf, for example, could perhaps start taking to heart the idea of glory through victory, not death. I do like what they did with Vayne in the original, saying that she's going to try and rebuild the Demacian Sentinel branch. Akshan will also agree to help recruit more Sentinels in Shurima, when he's not busy hunting Shadia's assailant at least. Maybe we can also say that Jace will help engineer weapons for the Sentinels in Piltover at his forge, assuming they don't mind lending him some relic stone. And of course, Gwen will remain to assist with the Black Mist, whenever and wherever it shows up. Ultimately, though, there's one more Sentinel recruit that will be joining the cause. You. Rookie never actually took the pledge in this version, after all, and still hasn't been properly trained yet either. I can't think of a more fitting end to the story than having Rookie take the pledge and become fully ingratiated as a Sentinel of Light. Oh, but we're not done just yet. Welcome to the epilogue. At this point, we cut back to Camivore, where the Ruined King is struggling against his binds. As he struggles, Viego is approached by a familiar skull-like face, Thresh. The Chain Warden seems delighted by Viego's helplessness, but Viego simply tells Thresh that he can't be bound in the lantern, and orders the Warden to free him. Thresh, however, insists that the only one being freed here is himself. Now, I still maintain that Unbound Thresh is just inferior to his original design, but I suppose it works in the context of his soul being freed from the Black Mist, allowing it to take on a more human appearance, like what he looked like before he was, corrupted by the Black Mist. Thresh reveals that this change is all thanks to his new patron, though Viego protests that he alone is king of the undead. Then, a voice speaks out, as a hulking armored figure approaches. You are no king. You are nothing more than a petulant child, lashing out over the loss of his favorite plaything. One such as you has no right to the throne of the dead. Viego stares at the newcomer incredulously, and asks his name, a hint of intimidation in the Ruined King's voice. I have many names. Founder of the Immortal Bastion, the Iron Revenant, Mordekaiser. But you will call me Master. So yes, if it weren't obvious, we're going to have Mordekaiser effectively take control of the Isles from this point onwards. If anyone should usurp the Ruined King, it should be the guy who literally conquered the Death Realm itself. The next time Riot wanted to do something with a big Shadow Isles event, we just have Mordekaiser as the big bad. I already have several ideas for how that could play out, but we can reserve those for another time. So, that was a lot, huh? This whole rewrite took a lot longer than I anticipated, and I sincerely thank everyone who took the time to go through this whole thing with me. I know it's not perfect, especially since some of these changes were based on aspects of the lore that have since been retconned. But I stand by the overall direction. At the core of it all, the biggest issue with Rise of the Sentinels is that the scope of the story was simply too big for the gimmicky grindfest it was presented as. We know Riot can produce good stories. We've seen them do events right. I can only hope they'll learn from this one and not attempt to bite off more than they can chew next time. But time will tell. Until then, feel free to share your own thoughts down in the comments below, and I'll see you all next time.